There's an issue that arises every year at the Winter Family Weekend on the basketball courts. Those of you that have played on the two basketball courts where the men play know this well. Those of you that have been there wonder why they have those fans on. They've got gigantic fans in that gymnasium that are, I would say, close to 20 feet in diameter. And, you know, you're in freezing temperature, and you're there in Louisville, and they crank up these fans. And what in the world's going on? I'm freezing. I hear that often. Do they have to have these fans on? Well, there's a reason why they have to have those fans on. Several years ago, they had a different kind of court composition that was there at the facility before they decided to up it to wood. So they put the wood floors in, but something happened when they designed the floors that they didn't account for condensation. So the floors weep. And they especially weep when there's precipitation falling from outside. And the moisture in the air and the moisture in the ground comes up through the gym floor, and it pools specifically right under one of the baskets on the gym court. And, you know, you imagine you're in a basketball game and there's a puddle of water underneath the basket. And, you know, folks like me who actually, you know, have an incredible vertical of about, 1 to 2 inches. We have to be very careful as we're jumping up to pull the ball off of the, 6 inches below the net to rebound it and land. One of the things that those of us that watch sports or play sports, one of the worst situations where your heart goes up into your throat is when you're seeing a person participate and all of a sudden they hit a slick spot on the floor and you just see them go down and they're down like that and you hear a thud or a crack. See that in sports, see that in basketball. That is an awful feeling. Literally, your heart goes up into your throat and you hear that sound. And that is something that they have to be very careful about there at that gym floor because the water can come up all of a sudden. And when it happens, the fall is sudden and the individual falls hard. Unfortunately, I have witnessed that. I have experienced that quick slip before they stop. Then they stop play and we get that wiped up. But that's something that they have to be aware of on that court all the time, every year that we're there. Sometimes we can be in a situation where it's very unsafe, be it the 1 or 2 times out of every 2 or 3 years that we get an ice storm here in the Dallas area. And we want to go out for a little walk because it's cold and it's kind of crisp and it's kind of neat to go out, but you know that ice is there and you've got to be very careful. But at the same time, just to be out in it, or sometimes we've got to get from here to there, and we know it's a bit of a dangerous path, but we've got to walk it anyway. And you're walking and you're taking those steps and then your feet start to go. And again, the adrenaline surge that we have knowing that I could fall and fall hard, like ice skating or roller skating that many of us have experienced. Last Sabbath, for those of us who were here, we talked about the knife's edge, walking the knife's edge in the Christian way of life. This narrow path that God's given us to walk. It's not this wide open path. It sometimes almost feels like we're walking a knife's edge. The way is so narrow and the chasms are on each side. We talked about, though, the beautiful principle that God puts in place, that as we walk that knife's edge, as we walk that path, that very narrow path, God's Scripture brings out that as we continue to walk it, the path begins to enlarge. The narrow path enlarges, and we see it clearly, and it becomes even safer and safer to walk. Doesn't seem that way at first, but as we walk it, it opens up to us. Let's extend that discussion today. Rarely do I speak back to back, so I'm going to extend that today with a related topic, but so it ties to it, but it is a separate topic with a very simple concept. The title of today's message is Psalm 73 and Psalm 37, My Feet Had Nearly Slipped. Psalm 73 and Psalm 37, my feet had nearly slipped. We just went through the blessing of the little children service. We ask God's blessing to be upon them, and we strive to teach our children to keep perspective about this life, about what's going on, about His blessings, that we put things in perspective as our kids grow up. And we see situations that we know well as kids growing up in the church. You look around and you see the world, you see your friends at school, you see individuals at school. Well, they get to have Halloween. Halloween, all the cool outfits, and everything's zombie this, zombie that, but the zombie outfits and all these things, and then they come back the next day, they're loaded with all this candy. And our kids see, well, that's interesting. They get to go out and do this. And look at what they rake in. Look at the multitude of food that they rake in. They get to have Christmas. They get to be on sports teams if they're good enough at a very early age, 5th grade, 6th grade. They get to be on traveling teams that go and play on Saturdays, and the team goes over here to this other city and plays in this tournament. And what do I get? If my dad runs the team and he can work out the schedule, we may get a little schedule going here, and hopefully we won't have any conflicts. But beyond that, what's really available to me? Young adults, people out there in the world, they can date anybody. I've looked around in the church, there's not that many available that I would think are my type. They're not there. Where are they? They don't have to marry in the church. All of that, whatever it is. They can get this job. They can get that job. I am limited because I keep the Sabbath. Families, we're just scraping by here. Look at my neighbors, or look at the people that live on the nicer side of the tracks. What all they have, the blessings that they have, the financial blessings, what they have going for them, the lifestyle. They go where they want to go. They travel where they want to travel. They eat out when they want to eat out. They don't even think about it. Retirement age, I'm scraping by. I barely get Social Security. And I'm trying to eke out an existence. I barely have enough money to get to church and back each week. And yet there are people over here that are living in the villages. They're living the dream. They've got their little 2-bedroom, 4-bath house there where they entertain guests and they play golf, and then they play this sport, and then they play this sport, and then they get in their 47-foot RV and go travel the world. And look, and here I am. And they don't follow God's way, but look how they live. In general, as we see evil in this world, we see people who do bad things. We see people who lie, who cheat, who steal, who are proud, who belittle others, who are boastful, who are greedy, who have all this power and wealth and influence. And it can be troubling in seeing that. It is troubling, quite troubling for some. Such was the case with Asaph. Let's look here at Psalm 73. As we begin today, it will be home base. Keep your tab there in Psalm 73. It says, the tragedy of the wicked, the blessedness of the trust in God, a psalm of Asaph. Who was Asaph? Do you know who Asaph was? Let's take a look at Asaph. Let's go to, well, we actually won't take a look at him, but we'll see some things about him. Let's go to 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles 29. Some have purported that David quoted many of these psalms to Asaph. And Asaph, who was involved in singing and putting songs together, that he simply recorded what David wrote him. The Treasury of David by Spurgeon, Spurgeon does not believe that is the case, nor do I. Let's look at Psalm, again, 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30, as one of the reasons why we don't believe that. 2 Chronicles 29, verse 30. Moreover, King Hezekiah, now King Hezekiah was around, early 700s BC, so this is some 300 years or so after David, Asaph, that time period. Moreover, King Hezekiah, king of the southern kingdom, and the leaders commanded the Levites to sing praise to the Lord with the words of David and of Asaph the seer. He was a seer. He was a prophet who also was involved in songwriting. This was a very, very influential person whom God inspired to write many of the Psalms. The Psalm David and of Asaph the seer. So they sang praises with gladness, and they bowed their heads in worship. One other reference, let's look at Nehemiah. Of course, Nehemiah occurs, 440s, mid-440s BC, so that's another 260 years, 255 years or so after even Hezekiah. Nehemiah, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Nehemiah 12. Nehemiah 12, verse 46. For in the days of David, Nehemiah 12:46, for in the days of David and Asaph of old, there were chiefs of the singers and songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. This was one of these individuals that wrote these songs, this person named Asaph. So let's look at what Asaph writes here. And what benefit could it be to us? Truly, Psalm 73, truly God is good to Israel. He's reflecting on all that God has done for Israel. He sees through King David what they've done, the notoriety that they've established, and they've seen God's hand in Israel. And by extension, we as God's people, spiritual Israel, can say, truly, God is good to spiritual Israel. We've just come through, the reminder of the holy day plan of God, and our part in that calling now is first fruits. He says, truly, God is good to Israel, to such as are pure in heart. But as for me, okay, he's pulling back now and he's saying, okay, as for me, Asaph, I was struggling. He said, my feet had almost stumbled. My steps had nearly slipped. Again, that is the title of the message. My steps had nearly slipped. What had caused Asaph, the seer of God, to nearly slip? For I was envious of the boastful. The Authorized King James Version here says the foolish. Somehow, he had allowed himself to become envious of those who seem to have it all, the foolish ones, and he begins to talk about these people don't even know God, but look at what they have. Look at how they're living, and you think, okay, how could an individual like him, whom God had used in the ways that he had used, who would have been in a very influential position in the kingdom of Israel, working with David and working alongside to write these songs and such, how could he have allowed that to enter his mind? How could we? How could we? Do we ever become envious? Do we ever look at others outside in the world to see what they have and say, you know what, I don't have that. Why don't I have that? Why do I have this, and this, and they have that? Why do some people in the congregation have what I don't have? But anyway, he says, speaking specifically of those that are boastful and those that are foolish that are out there in the world, he says, I allowed myself to become envious of the foolish when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. Verse 4, for there are no pangs in their death. There are no pains in their death. As he's seeing their lives, the money, the influence that they have, the way that people rally around them to care for them because they've got all this money and can influence people and have everything at their fingertips. Even at the point of death, they've got everything they need. Their strength is firm. Verse 5, they're not in trouble like other men, nor are they plagued like other men. Therefore, they wear pride as a necklace. Violence covers them like a garment. They can do whatever they want to do and injurious to other people. Their eyes bulge with abundance. They have so much. Look at them. And they've got it all. And how do they treat God? How do they live? They don't live appropriately. And he got envious of that. Verse 8, they scoff and they speak wickedly concerning oppression. They speak loftily. They set their mouth against the heavens and their tongue walks through the earth. Therefore, his people return here, and waters of a full cup are drained by them. Just suck people dry in terms of their greediness. And they say, how does God know? What's he know? And what does he know about what I'm doing? Is there really even a God? As we see, so much of this nation has moved to the mindset of it's stupid to actually believe that there is a higher being that created all this. It's stupid and small-minded. Is what is permeated in much of the education that is there as we look at even something as basic as evolution of how that is used to get rid of God. Anyway, so continuing, he says, how does God know? And is there any knowledge in the Most High? I mean, come on. Behold, he says, these people, they are the ungodly, and yet they're always at ease. They increase in riches, and he says, then he comes to this point looking at his life, surely I've cleansed my heart in vain. What's it worth? What's it worth to have done all that I've done? I've done it in vain. I've washed my hands in innocence. It's all been in vain. For all day long I have been plagued and chastened every morning. I deal with this, I deal with this, I deal with this. It's all day long that I'm dealing with these things. And look at these people over here. They're at ease, they have everything, and they don't even know God. They're boastful, they're foolish, and yet look at what they have. And it got to him. It got to him. Has it ever gotten to you? Has it ever gotten to me? If we're honest with ourselves, as we look at what we see, our perception of what others have and what they don't have, do these thoughts ever enter our minds? Now we come to verse 15, and we see a lesson, one lesson. He said, if I had said, I'm going to speak thus. Asaph's saying, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm really struggling with this, and I actually found myself starting to get envious. He said, if I had said, I'm going to speak thus and say it, he says, then, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. Think about that. And that speaks to a very important lesson for us as God's people, those of us who are in situations of influence. And to one degree or another, I think we can make a case that all of us are influencers at different times in leadership. But the treasury of David, again, Spurgeon makes this statement here when he says this. Let's read it again. If I had said, I'll speak thus, behold, I would have been untrue to the generation of your children. Spurgeon says, it's not always wise to think one's thought. If they remain in, they will injure only ourselves. Now, I would debate that to some degree, but at least initially, if we have these thoughts, where in this case it was envy, and we keep that in, it does injure us. It eats us up. But again, where I differ with him is that does play out in our impact on others. But initially, if we keep our mouths shut about it and we battle this in our minds and we find that we're giving ourselves over to this envy of how come these people have all of these things, be it a little kid here in the congregation who sees all of these things that somebody else has, the neighbor, or like I say, young adult, middle age, whatever. He says it had been one thing there, but he goes on to say, but once uttered, their mischief may be great. For such a man as Asaph, the utterance which his discontent suggested would have been a heavy blow and a deep discouragement to the whole brotherhood. If he had said what he was thinking, in his position of influence, this individual who served in this capacity, a seer of God, if he would have uttered that, it would have really messed with some people's heads, wouldn't it? It really would have influenced negatively these people whom he served, these people whom he led, and in all the things that he had said previously, it really would have messed things up. So when we have those kinds of thoughts, there are some of us here, and I am in this category, we've talked about this before, who talk to think. If you are a talker to thinker, if you are a talker to think kind of person, when we have thoughts like this, it's not good to talk them because it has a very negative influence when it is something that we're concerned about whether it's right to even have that thought. If you're a person who thinks to talk, and you rarely ever talk, but you keep that thing in your mind, well, it's not going to impact others immediately, but it's impacting us and it's eating us away. So, it's ultimately either if we think to talk and never say it, even though we know it to be wrong, or if we talk because everything that I think actually comes out before I even think it, either way it's going to be bad here. So it's very important for us, again, to never negate the degree to which we impact others. And he recognizes here, I didn't say anything about it, and it didn't impact these other people, but what happened to me? Look at what he says in verse 16. But when I thought how to understand this whole situation, it was too painful to me. He knew he couldn't get it off his chest because of verse 15, but it seethed inside and raged inside him. And it troubled him. It was too painful for him. So we come to the essence of how to combat this kind of thing in verse 17. He recognized that he could not get his mind wrapped around this kind of situation that he sees with others until he does what? Verse 17, until I went into the sanctuary of God. That's the perspective adjustment for all of us. That is the key. Until he went into the sanctuary of God, he wasn't unable to process it all. But once he went into the sanctuary of God, then he understood their end. Then it became very clear how all of this works, how all of this situation with these people seeming to have this and these people seeming to have all this, and these are evil people and this and that, and I'm in, how come I don't have that? And it eats us up until we go into the sanctuary of God, meaning until we come into communion with God. We're in contact with God, drinking in of His Word, praying to Him, thinking deeply on the things that are of God. He, in a sense, goes in metaphorically to this sanctuary, and it begins to open up all around him. Everything that he sees everything in the right perspective. So I would ask us as parents, do we have the ability, or do we have the ability first to grasp that? Do we struggle with this? How are we to teach our children not to struggle with this if we struggle with it? Do we see others in the world that have things that we don't have? And do we feel shortchanged at times? How are we going to be able to help our children see the things like Halloween, Christmas, sports teams, all these situations, if we don't ourselves see what the construct is that we have to be in the sanctuary of God? If we are in the sanctuary of God in our relationship with God, then we can teach our children, and our children can come in a sense, into the sanctuary of God as well, to see things as God sees our lives versus the lives of the world. So in thinking of that, as God's people, we've got to understand the yield, the negative yield of that type of behavior, the ultimate end. As he says here, then I began to understand their end. Only until I went into the sanctuary of God and deeply think about God's plan. We've just gone through God's plan and see how all that plays out. Only then do I begin to understand their end, and I get perspective then on so what, they've got this, so what, they've got this, so what, they've got that. I understand the end of what that way of life is without that person's calling and bringing that person to Him and that person yielding to that. I understand that, and I then have a greater appreciation of what God is doing for me now and what He has laid out for me. Our kids can understand that. Our kids can understand that at an age-appropriate level as we teach them. Now he's seeing clearly because he's dwelling in the sanctuary of God. There's a fellow I've quoted previously, and I quoted from this book previously. It's called Happiness is a Serious Problem in the World. It is a serious problem, the inability for folks to be happy. And when this individual, Dennis Prager, in his book, writes about that, he's speaking, I guess if I could do church talk, it would be more of an understanding of what. When he says happiness, he's speaking to the effect of what we would call joy, true joy, that will have times of ups and downs and sadness, but there is an inner joy. So when he uses that term happiness, he's speaking to that. But I want to quote from a passage in his book, speaking to this thing of being able to see it for what it is. Fun is most definitely important to a happy life, but unless understood and used properly, fun actually reduces happiness. One reason is that fun shares a number of characteristics with drugs. Motivated by the belief that fun and its partner excitement will bring happiness, fun and excitement will bring happiness, motivated by that belief, many men and women become fun addicts, people who pursue fun with ever-increasing amounts of energy, money, and time, and sometimes at great cost to personal lives and family. Fun shares an additional trait with drugs. The next dose must be as fun or as strong or stronger than the previous one. For many people, fun is not satisfying in moderate doses. The kick becomes insufficient. And for those who associate fun and excitement with happiness, seeking fun in moderation is as absurd as seeking happiness in moderation. The problem of needing to raise the excitement threshold for fun is a real one. And he talks about just the nature of relationships. When we first find that person that we think this is going to be the person that I marry, we get a little more romantically involved. And then at some point there's that first kiss. And then is that enough? Well, the way God designed the whole relationship is that it leads towards the marital bond. That's the way God designed it. That's part of the motivation, part of the drive that God has put in us as men and women. But it becomes where, we're good friends, but we want to be married. I mean, we want to be married. We want to have a family. And that it leads to wanting more. And that's something that God put in each of us. He's not saying that. I'm saying that when he's talking about this aspect of the progression from the first kiss to more. So continuing, he says this. So then now, for those who pursue fun and excitement rather than happiness or inner joy, in time, that too loses much of its ability to provide fun and excitement, and more potent pleasures are needed. Hence, we have things like infidelity, because the fun and excitement is gone. So I've got to have more. In this regard, he says, I sometimes think that Hollywood stars have an almost God-given role to play in our world. The richest, most beautiful, and most famous people who do indeed have constant access to the most fun, the best parties, the most intimate encounters with glamorous partners, the most expensive cars, the most luxurious homes, the most exotic vacations, and the most opportunities to engage in and get to attend the best sports events, the best theatrical events. These individuals repeatedly remind us that these things do not lead to true happiness. In memoir after memoir, they reveal to us the sad lives behind all the fun and excitement. We should feel greatly indebted, he says, to every Hollywood star who has written about his or her alcoholism, losing children through that, depressed life, profound loneliness, and various addictions. If we could learn from others' lives, a trait that may best define what wisdom is, learning from others' lives, we would be very grateful to these people for providing such credible testimony that fun doesn't lead to true, lasting, meaningful happiness. As parents, upon what do we place emphasis in our kids' lives in looking at true happiness, true joy, versus the fun that's out there? So do we help them see what leads to a blessed life? And at an age-appropriate level, parents, do you believe that your children could articulate to you what a blessed life looks like? Because I think that speaks to the degree to which we've helped them understand that. Now, again, I understand that some kids are more verbal than others, but are we doing that? Because that's in essence what Asaph began to battle. He was thinking, he got messed up, and this guy's a man of God here, and he got messed up, and he got pulled away in that and turned aside. As we discussed last week, we know God sees all, and God, it says in verse 18, let's go to verse 18 now. Surely, as he began to understand their end, in verse 18 he says, surely to God, surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Let's go to Romans 12. We'll come back to it here in a second. But let's go to Romans 12, verse 19. Romans 12 speaks to this concept of when we see situations that are not right, situations where folks are impacting others negatively. Romans 12, verse 17, repay no one evil for evil, have regard for good things in the sight of all men, and we as much as is possible, we strive to live peaceably with all. Verse 19, beloved, do not avenge yourselves, because we can also get in that situation where, yes, we know God sees all, but we want to do something about it. We want to avenge ourselves when these things have happened, or we see others that are godless and doing bad things that impact us, and look at them. They're living high on the hog, so to speak. Well, they're literally eating hog too. Okay, anyway, but rather, give place to wrath. Give place to wrath, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I'll repay, says the Lord. I'll take care of it. And God, in perfect righteous wrath, can handle those situations. Therefore, we know the passage, if your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. For in doing so, you heap coals of fire on his head. Are we teaching the principle of that to our children? Do our children understand that we're not doing this so the coals will come down even hotter and burn that person even hotter because I want to see that person burn? And it's not that. But it's in saying that if we are living a godly life and behaving towards this person in a godly way, as that person does not see that and respond in kind, it's going to be worse and worse for that person. We pray for that person. We want that person to turn, and we want to set an example of being a loving, godly representative of Jesus Christ. But as they do not turn from that, they heap it up because of the bad doings that they do. Verse 21, don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Back to Psalm 73, because this is another concept with respect to this God that we serve. God does see all, and God is not mocked. God sees all, and God is not mocked. In fact, I think those of us that have been around for years as members and in the ministry, we have seen this happen. We've seen it happen with ministers. We've seen it happen with members. People who are not living as they ought and doing things that they shouldn't be doing. This is a truism of God, and this is the God that we serve in how he deals with these situations. Psalm 73, verse 19. Let's go to verse 18 again. Surely you set them in slippery places. You cast them down to destruction. Verse 19. Oh, how they are brought to desolation as in a moment. They're up there. They're big time and this and that, and then boom, they hit, and it goes down, and it goes in a moment. And it shocks us, even though we may have known a situation that was going on, and this and that, and this and that, and why is something not happening? But at some point, we begin to be at peace with that. It's in God's hands. And in essence, we just say, we're going to go forward. And then, boom, it happens in this individual's life, and they fall in a moment. And it is of God's doing. Sometimes it is of God's doing. Sometimes it's simply of a matter of actions result in consequences. And those consequences yield that. But they are utterly consumed with terrors. As a dream when one awakes, so, Lord, when you awake, you shall despise their image. When God intervenes and acts, it happens very, very suddenly. My feet, he says, had nearly slipped. As an aside, again, young or old, this can occur. This slipping, where we allow ourselves to get into this thought of, why does this happen? Why do these people have this, and why don't I have this? It can come in at any age. It can come with young people. Say you're a young person in this congregation. Say both mom and dad are not in the church. Maybe only one is. Maybe you come with grandparents. Look at this family over here. Look at this family over here. They've got it all. The dad's got a great job. They're in great situation financially. Look at all the blessings that they have. Look at where they go. Look at what they do. And look at us over here. Look at me. Look at what I have. Even in situations where it's not necessarily an evil person that's doing bad things, we see something else and why don't I get to have that? Why don't I have that? And we can become envious. I'm single and I see this person over here that's married and this, and they have a family, and why don't I have that? What have they done to deserve that? I know something about them that's not the best, and yet they still have this. And I'm trying to do this right here. Envy can set in, and it was seeping into Asaph, and he said, "This is bad news for me. What am I doing?" He went into the sanctuary of God, and he began to see, as he dwelled on God's ways, he began to see that God takes care of this. God takes care of this. We can allow envy to enter in, and it will grab us if we do. These kids, look at these kids. These kids were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. And look at us over here. What do we have? Proverbs 14, verse 30. Proverbs 14, verse 30. My feet nearly slipped, Asaph said. Have our feet nearly slipped on some of these things? These things that we allow to go on in the backs of our minds sometimes as we see maybe things not going our way that we think, why doesn't it? Proverbs 14, verse 30. A sound heart, or the NIV says, a heart of peace. I like both phrases here. A heart of peace or a sound heart, it's life to the body. Asaph got back to that sound heart. He got back to that heart of peace with God's help. But envy is rottenness to the bones. Envy rots our bones. Proverbs 27, verse 4. Proverbs 27, verse 4, something similar. 27, verse 4, wrath is cruel and anger is a torrent. Those are bad situations, but who is able to stand before jealousy? Who's able to stand before envy? It's like the king of those. And if you've ever dealt with a situation where a person is envious and it comes out, you can't stand before that. I mean, in terms of overcoming that, to help that person realize this is wrong. When envy is fully taken on and we allow envy to control us, he says, who can stand before that? It is very, very powerful satanic tool. It is Satan's nature, jealousy and envy. Who can stand before it? Does it sneak into our lives? Are we on it when we see that begin to slip in, or just the little snippet of that to sometimes sneak into our children's lives? Cain had it. And let's go to Proverbs 23. Cain had it, and he had the opportunity. God said, "Hey, Cain, if you do good, it's going to be good. Things will go well for you." But was quite envious of Abel's stance and position with God, and to the point that he let that overtake him versus turning and repenting. He let that overtake him and committed the first murder. It is a very, very powerful, evil aspect of our nature. A powerful aspect that was seeping into Asaph's life. Proverbs 23, verse 17. Proverbs 23, verse 17, he states, "Don't let your heart envy sinners, but be zealous. Be zealous for the fear of the Lord all the day. Keep the focus where it needs to be. Don't out here on these other areas, for surely there is a hereafter. We know that. And our hope, your hope, will not be cut off. God sees all. And one of the aspects of not slipping is to recognize that surely there is a hereafter, and God will care for us as we walk in his ways and as we are zealous toward him. Mark Davis, a talk radio guy here in the area. Some of you may listen to Mark Davis. He's on 660 in the mornings. I rarely hear him, but one time I heard him subbing for someone else as I was driving. And he said, in terms of God seeing all, and in terms of our lives, and as I'm thinking about being zealous for the Lord all the day long, he made this statement. He said, we have to see ourselves, see every situation of our life as a photo moment. We've got to see every situation in our life as a Facebook post that's going to go out there. Every thought in our mind, everything that we say, everything that we're thinking, everything that we're doing, we've got to see that as a potential Facebook post that once it goes out there, it's never coming back. I wish we would think of that more often, I guess, in our Facebook posts. But in the aspect of even our lives with respect to God, our Father, He sees everything. He sees it all. They're Facebook posts to God. Here's what I'm thinking right now. Here's what I'm doing right now. Here's what I'm thinking. He sees it all. And we've got to see everything as that and be zealous for the Lord all day long. Let's go to Psalm 10. We actually are going to end early today, believe it or not. Let's go to Psalm 10. Do we as God's people allow ourselves, children, teens, young adults, middle-aged with 2 kids and 14 on the way, whatever our situation is, do we look at, again, to turn it to God in what God is doing for us and through His church and what we're a part of versus what God hasn't given us? Are you in danger of that? I don't think God would have inspired Asaph to spill his guts to us unless it's something with which we can fall prey to as well. We are given a way to do this appropriately when we see others who may be just downright evil, having all the things that they have in the world. Job petitions God at one point. Jeremiah in Jeremiah 12 petitions God. I like the way this psalmist does it. He has a conversation with God, and I don't see this to be disrespectful. I see this individual as petitioning God, and petitioning God with the right mindset, because we see that as the psalm continues. Let's read it. Do we do this with God as we see evil, as we see those that are hurting others, as we see others who are hurting us? Why do you stand far off, O Lord? Sounds accusational, doesn't it? It's not, though. He's petitioning God. Why do you stand far off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Look at what's happening over here. You see this. Let them be caught in the plots which they have devised. For the wicked boasts of his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Look at that. Look at all the things that are happening in his life. Your judgments are far above, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he sneers at them. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I'm not going to be an adversary. Never shall I be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places he murders the innocent. His eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws them into his net. So he crouches, he lies low, that the helpless may fall by his strength. He said in his heart, God's forgotten. He hides his face, he'll never see. And then so he's petitioning God. God, you have not acted here, and I'm petitioning you now. Arise, O Lord, praying, asking for God. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift up your hand. Don't forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He said in his heart, you will not require an account. But you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief. God, you see it all, to repay it by your hand. We know the plan of God, that God will take care of those issues. And some of these he takes care of now. Some of these you'll take care of at a later time. But we know that. We know that God sees that. We know that he sees it and that he observes trouble and grief to repay it by his hand. The helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his hand. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble, and you will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. We petition God as we see things going on, and we do it in the right perspective because we know who God is, that He is the righteous judge. He is the God of perfect love. He's the God of perfect mercy, who knows what each person needs to get them to turn within His plan. So brethren, I ask us all as we turn finally back to Psalm 73, I ask us all to take a look at, have my feet nearly slipped in this area on occasion? Are my feet nearly slipping now? Are there any situations with our kids to where we see they start to slide into this, as Asaph did, where they're nearly slipping? Can we turn that? Can we go into the sanctuary of God, so to speak, remain in the sanctuary of God so that we don't nearly slip and have that slip that is a hard fall and a sudden fall to where folks gasp? Psalm 73, verse 21. We will not turn to Psalm 37, the two numbers, but I would ask if you could maybe in this upcoming week to read Psalm 37, because it's a great parallel to Psalm 73. Speaks to many of the same concepts. Psalm 73, verse 21. So as he is considering this, he says in the state that he was, "Thus my heart was grieved. I was vexed in my mind. I was so foolish and ignorant." I'm frustrated with myself, he's saying here, that I was so ignorant that I allowed this to happen. I was like a beast before you. So he, again, recognized his own humanity and was frustrated that he allowed his mind to go to that point. He says, verse 23, "Nevertheless, I am continually with you. You will hold me by my right hand. You will guide me with your counsel, and afterwards you'll receive me to glory. Whom have I in heaven but you? And there is none upon the earth that I desire besides you." Can we really say that in our lives? Can our children say that? I believe we can. My flesh and my heart fail. And we see folks around us, we know in our own lives, we're getting older, and we can be moving closer and closer to death in knowing that this temporary physical life is not going to go on forever. He says, my flesh and my heart fail, but God is the strength of my heart, and he is my portion forever. For indeed, those who are far from you shall perish. You have destroyed all those who desert you for harlotry. Whatever that harlotry is, physical, spiritual, you'll destroy those ultimately. Verse 28, "But it is good for me to draw near to God. I have put my trust in the Lord God, that I may declare all your works." My feet had nearly slipped. Have ours? Have ours? Have ours? Stay in the sanctuary of God.